The GBA Fire Emblem games aren't perfect, but they do have some great maps. They also have some awful maps, and I was 100% ready to shit on bad map design for 15 minutes straight, but it turns out that 72% of my audience would rather I made a positive video. So here is my top 10 favourite maps in the GBA Fire Emblem games. Obviously this is a very subjective topic, so don't get salty in the comments. These are just the best maps in my opinion. If you have different favourite maps, please put them in a comment below the video and we can have a nice friendly discussion about it. Getting straight into it at number 10, we have FE7 Battle Before Dawn. This map is fun, until it isn't. If you're playing an Iron Man, then this map is horrendous, but if you're just playing a normal playthrough where you're happy to reset the chapter if things don't go to plan, then it's actually pretty enjoyable. The unpredictability of how Jafar and Zephiel fare against the enemy provide quite an entertaining variety of outcomes. Sometimes Jafar deserves his title, the Angel of Death, critting every enemy in his range. Sometimes he decides that drinking elixirs is for nerds and gets himself killed on turn 2. Sometimes Zephiel manages to deal with one whole enemy successfully. Sometimes he forgets what weapon triangle advantage is and takes an axe to the face. There's also some fantastic loot on this map, with the boots, Delphi Shield, Brave Lance and Rescue Staff up for grabs, but only if you move quickly. The thieves are reachable if you play well, but any dilly-dallying will lose you some of the best items in the game. There's also an Elysian Whip and an Earth Seal on enemies if you want those too, or you can just sell them for more gold. The timed objectives of reaching Zephiel and recovering the treasure really make the time pressure feel tangible, and you end up charging for the centre of the map at breakneck pace whilst trying to not put your units at risk of dying. Which can happen if you aren't careful, as the mini-boss Maxime can be lethal if you're unlucky, and the boss Ursula has a bolting tome, so you have to play well. Zephiel being a game over condition alongside all of the other considerations provides an interesting challenge to this map, which won't be to everyone's tastes, but I personally like it. As I said before though, if you're doing an Iron Man, then this chapter is horrific, so because of that I can't justify putting it any higher on the list than number 10. At number 9 on my list is FE7 in Occupation's Shadow. This is the only chapter of Lynn's story that stands out to me as a map that I actually enjoy playing. Unfortunately, Lynn mode is basically a 10 chapter tutorial. It is filled with maps that are very basic and forgettable, but Occupation's Shadow is a defend map, and defend maps are fun. And even more importantly, it's the chapter where you get Dorcas, my favourite meme. This is only the 4th map you play in Lynn's story, but it's actually quite a fun ride, having multiple choke points to defend with your units, plus a crumbling wall that forms an additional entrance, and a boss that you can push forwards to reach and get his sweet XP. Defend chapters are generally loved by most players, and I think one of the main reasons why is because they give you more than one option on how to play the map. You can pull all of your units back to the central room and clog up all the enemies where they can't do more than a single attack per turn, but that's not super fun. You could defend the main entrances to the fort as intended with your units that aren't exactly OP yet, which is more fun, or you could charge full steam ahead and try to carve a path to the boss, which is what all the cool kids do. I do think that Battle Before Dawn is clearly a better map because it's a lot more developed and fleshed out, but it also has its problems, whereas this map doesn't really have anything going against it. Admittedly, it is pretty easy, but I would argue that maps don't have to be challenging to be enjoyable. Easy and boring are not the same thing. I have played a couple of rebalanced and reskinned versions of FE7, and most of them have increased the difficulty of Lynn mode maps, and in those hacks this chapter becomes a genuine challenge and you're fairly likely to lose units, which makes me love the map even more. Obviously I can't take non-vanilla gameplay into account for this list, so this map is a bit easy and a bit basic, and so for those reasons I can't really put it any higher than number 9. I could swap this map out for Talon's Light that comes later in the game, as it provides a very similar experience but with a higher difficulty and some optional treasure objectives. You could argue that Talon's Light is the better map. I purely put in Occupation's Shadow here because I think it deserves some recognition for being the only good Lynn mode map in my opinion, but you could count Talon's Light as an alternate for this spot. Number 8 is FE7 The Peddler Merlinus, and I promise this list isn't just FE7 maps, I swear. I am an FE7 fanboy, I have a lot of nostalgia for this game, but this is the last FE7 map for a while, I promise. This is the map where Eliwood first encounters Merlinus and he enters the employ of House Ferre. The stress of the job will eventually cause him to go bald, but for now he's ecstatic about being gainfully employed. For anyone who's a big FE6 fan, you'll have to let me know if you enjoy seeing Merlinus introduced in this this way in FE7, but for me, I really enjoy it and his character is funny. This map is another defense map, so a lot of what I liked about the last map applies to this one as well. There's plenty of options for where you want to make your stand, either blocking all of the bridges to the central island or dragging Malinus off into a corner where you can more easily manage the oncoming enemies, or you could even choose to rush the boss Puzon. But in addition to all of those things, this map also has a couple of other components that flesh it out a little bit more. You have a village in the northeast with 5,000 gold, which is pretty valuable since gold is very limited in the early game of FE7, especially in Hector mode, so this makes a good solo mission for Marcus, while the rest of your squad protects Malinus, or you can push up with multiple units and try to control this open area against the Nomad reinforcements long enough to reach the village with someone else. You also have the added complication of the fog to consider here. It's not too hard of a map to navigate in the fog, and you are guaranteed to have a torch from the last chapter, which paired with Matthew can trivialize the visibility issues you would otherwise have, but it's still an additional layer to the map. At the end of the day, the reasons for this map being in my top 10 is very similar to the last map, but it's just more fleshed out, and Malinus is an OG, so this map claims the number 8 spot. Number 7 is FE6 Rescue Mission. This chapter sees Etruria's Mage General Cecilia get curb stomped by Zephiel, and then the bosses play musical chairs with the throne. Zephiel and Nashin get bored of playing and leave, leaving Flair as the winner, and his prize is getting killed by your units. But first, your squad has to get to him, with 2 bridges to choose between, each defended by a well-placed ballista and some fairly strong enemies which provide a nice challenge. This is also the map where you get Milady, which is potentially my favourite unit in all of FE6. She's able to do quite a lot in this chapter, just as long as the other units deal with the ballista for her. I'm personally not the biggest fan of weapons with high range like ballista, but most of my issues are with siege tomes like bolting that can do catastrophic damage to any of your physical units, whereas ballista are way weaker and you only have to be careful with your 1 or 2 flying units. And I think this chapter is a great example of how ballista should be utilised in map design. They make you use your flyers carefully, and they make it difficult for you to send your flyers out to intercept the oncoming wyverns in order to protect your flank, and they slow your overall advance, but they're not problematic enough to be frustrating. And the way they slow you down a little makes a really interesting challenge when paired with the time limit for Percival. The daddy of all paladins, Percival, can be recruited early in this chapter by talking to him with Lauren or Elfin, but he leaves the map on turn 8. There's no real punishment for waiting a few chapters to recruit him later, but if you do want him early, then this provides an interesting timed side objective where you have to push pretty hard across the northern bridge in order to reach him in time. There's also 2 villages here, one having a body ring and one with an L sword, and you can totally just ignore the sword in favour of the stat booster, but if you do want both villages, then you have to split your forces a little to try and reach both. You might have noticed a trend emerging here where my favourite maps tend to be the ones where you have a lot of choice in how you choose to play the map, with multiple options and side objectives that you can attempt or ignore. Fire Emblem has a lot of samey maps, so any chapter that avoids falling into the category of kill every enemy or walk in straight line until you kill boss, it's always going to stand out above the rest. I think this map does enough of that to be worthy of the number 7 spot, but some of the other maps on this list have perfected this art, and we'll get to those in a bit. Number 6 is FE8 Revolt at Carsino. This is a map that's a bit tricky to explain what I like about it. The chapter starts off with Prince Inez getting betrayed by the Carsino military, and you have to ride to his aid before the enemy overwhelms him. One of the reasons why Rescue Mission made it into my top 10 is because you get Milady, who is one of my favourite units, and Revolt in Carsino, you get 3 of my favourite units. Inez's squad contains Inez, Garrick, and Tethys, who all start out as green units holed up in a fort, but don't let your previous experiences of green units fool you. These 3 have no problem looking after themselves as green units until you recruit them. In fact, you can literally choose to ignore them and just go kill the boss if you really want, and they'll probably be fine, and they just recruit themselves at the end of the chapter. Inez is a pre-promoted sniper with pretty good stats for chapter 10, and he also has A rank in bows, letting him murder people with his silver bow. Garrick is locked to 1 range as a mercenary, but that doesn't matter because his great offensive stats let him 1 round literally anything, and starting at level 10 with a hero crest in his inventory means you can just promote him immediately, and as soon as you trade him a hand axe, he will clear entire chapters on his own without difficulty. And Tethys is a dancer, which automatically makes her fantastic, but she's also my favourite dancer in the GBA games. All 3 of these units make a great first impression in this map, which is a really big part of whether you end up liking a unit or not. Having Cecilia join your army in the desert map, where she cannot move more than a single tile per turn, is soul destroying and makes me not like her as a unit. In Inez and Garrick murder a squad of enemies unsupervised, and then getting to use them myself to murder even more enemies is an awesome feeling and makes this map an absolute blast. I said for In Occupation's Shadow that an easy map doesn't necessarily mean a boring map, and that absolutely applies here. It's not super challenging, but it's a really fun time. The green squad kicks ass, but eventually might need rescuing before things can go wrong for them, and when you do go south to recruit them, it triggers additional reinforcements to spawn, which puts the pressure on and gives you some more enemies to carve through. It also makes this squad of enemies charge you, which contains the 4th new unit you can get in this chapter, Marissa. Unfortunately, Marissa does not have the impressive introduction that the other 3 units get, as she is arguably one of, if not the, worst unit in the entire game. Whatever you decide to do about heading south to recruit these 4, eventually you will turn your attention back north to the boss of the map, Pablo, who looks like he drowns puppies in his downtime, but he does drop a guiding ring after being defeated, so I guess that redeems him. Getting this promotion item is normally quite a big deal, as by the end of this chapter you've probably got more than one magic user past level 10, and this is the second guiding ring that you've been able to get by this point, so it's a very welcome reward for clearing the chapter. There's not really too much analysis to do here, and the map doesn't offer unique objectives for you to do. It just gives you several new characters, a good first impression of those units, and a really cool map that's enjoyable to play, which puts it at number 6 on my list. At number 5 we have FE8 Phantom Ship. This map is infamous for being one of the hardest chapters in all of the GBA games. You are stuck on this big wooden rectangle, which if you aren't careful will become your coffin, and you are surrounded by enemies that come out of the fog from all directions to end your Fire Emblem career. We've had maps on this list that aren't super difficult, and this is the opposite end of the scale, where the challenge of the map is a big part of its identity and its appeal. On hard difficulty, you cannot afford to make mistakes on this chapter, or you will be punished with 1 or more deaths. A big part of the danger is that there are many flying enemies with both physical and magical attacks, so you can't just use a high defense unit to tank the gargoyles because they'll get murdered by moguls, and you can't rely on a high res unit to handle the moguls because a gargoyle will kill them. If you're careful, you can avoid overlapping the different enemy types so you can handle just one at a time, especially if you use the Thief Torch combo with Colm to increase your vision in the fog, and you do have a few other tools at your disposal to handle the map. Seth is the Chad he's always been, and his res stat is pretty good for a physical unit, while Dussel that you recruited in the last chapter is a super tanky unit with even better defense than Seth and pretty okay res. Both of these units are crucial to handling the threats on this map, and Pure Waters can make them both even more reliable against the moguls. There's also some pretty scary enemies on the ship that arrives, mainly the fetid claw enemies that risk one-shotting some of your less bulky units if you aren't careful. You can just take your time dealing with the enemies on this map at a comfortable pace without putting your units at too much risk, but there is a pretty stingy timed objective here, and that is saving Laracle and Dosler. These two appear on the far side of the map on turn 5 and immediately get swarmed by enemies. Dosler can handle himself pretty well and it's unlikely to die very quickly, but Laracle is frail with no way of defending herself, so she dies super quickly, and without her you can't even recruit Dosler, so you've lost out on 2 units at once. You definitely can reach them before Laracle dies, but you have to power through the absolute battalion of enemies on the middle ship very quickly, which is a serious challenge. Once again, having optional side objectives that allow you to play the game in different ways depending on your mood and playstyle makes for a very fun map, especially one as challenging as this, which is why I've put it at number 5. Number 4 is FE7 Kinship's Bond. This is my favourite defense map in Fire Emblem. Period. The number and variety of enemies along with the ballistae make it quite hard to make your initial push forward, and believe me, you really want to make that push. You could just choke the entrance to your starting position and defend Nils, who is even more lifeless than usual, but there are some rewards that you really don't want to miss out on. The treasure room is very quickly looted by a thief, and he is likely to run away with your gold and Brave Axe if you don't push forward to intercept him. While the later part of FE7 isn't too much of a struggle for money, 10,000 is still a huge sum to miss out on, and the Brave Axe is one of the best weapons in the entire game, especially for units like Hector, Hawkeye and Geats, who are all amazing combat units but can struggle with speed, making the Brave Axe the perfect weapon for them in certain situations. There's also a droppable Knight's Crest, which is the only one in the campaign besides the one you get in Whereabouts Unknown, and you really want to get this to use on one of your Cavaliers or Armor Knights if you're a Maverick. I actually maintain that giving Oswin boots and every other stat booster you can to make make him an indestructible 7-move tank is one of the most baller moves you can make in these games, even if it's not the smartest idea. In addition to the rewards, you also have 3 units join in this chapter. Isadora, who is a bit of a meme unfortunately, since her survivability isn't great, but I will happily take that silver sword and angelic robe off of her hands and use her as a human sacrifice to make the chapter easier. You also get Wrath, who is kind of forgettable honestly. He's not very charismatic character-wise, his stats aren't anything incredible, and bow units are in a really tough position in FE7 where bows only deal double damage against flyers compared to the triple damage in FE6 and FE8. But if you do want a bow user, then he's probably the best candidate, so he's okay, I guess. But oh boy, did I save the best for last. Heath is the only playable Wyvern unit in FE7 aside from Vida, who you only have for a couple of chapters in the end game, which automatically makes him good. And strangely enough, he's not as OP as Wyverns usually are, but I think that's a good thing. Wyverns are way too powerful in the GBA games, and having a Wyvern that has more middling combat stats is actually refreshing. He still gets really good after he's trained up, and joining at level 7 lets you get him to promotion quite quickly if you want to early promote him and get yourself a fairly strong Wyvern Lord. Or my favourite option is to give him the Aphas drops at the end of the next chapter to raise his growth by 5%, and then give him every level you can to make him an absolute beast. And if you're playing on Hector hard mode, then he also comes with hard mode bonuses which make him even more solid. He is one of my favourite Fire Emblem characters, and I'm always excited to play this map and recruit him. The boss Eubens is also a pretty good boss. He has a spear which is nasty, and on hard difficulty he actually charges you if you enter his range, which is quite a neat way of ending the map early if you want to push up to the middle and draw him in without getting your units murdered. This is easier said than done with the number of enemies converging on the middle of the map, in addition to how scary Eubens can be to your units, often having crit rates against most of them. I just think that the overall difficulty level of this chapter is really well balanced, and I really enjoy playing it, which is why it is at number 4 on the list. Number 3 is FE6, the Hero of the Western Isles. This map has so much to offer. I'm generally not the biggest fan of large maps, but this is how to do a big map properly. You have multiple timed objectives, multiple paths you can take to reach them, lots of smaller objectives along the way with very little dead space in between them, a crazy amount of treasure rewards, and the opportunity to add 4 new units to your roster if you play your cards right. This map has everything. You have to push into this map pretty quickly if you want to reach all of the villages before the bandits spawn in and start destroying domiciles, and you definitely want to do this because visiting all of the villages rewards you with a hero crest, which is one of the most valuable promotion items in the game. The villages themselves also give you some fantastic rewards for visiting them, including 3 of the best stat boosters with an angelic robe, Draco shield and speedwing, plus 5,000 gold and an Orion's bolt. And speaking of rewards, if you have the squad of archers that arrive with Klein survive the chapter, you get an additional Orion's bolt, and the same with Thea's squad of Pegasus knights rewarding you with an Elysian whip if you keep them alive. The sheer amount of good obtainable items in this chapter alone makes it a fun time, and the level of challenge provided by the time pressure is perfectly balanced. You have an additional entrance to the north if you choose to break the wall, and Shanna can rescue drop over the walls if you want, but any method of approach is met with a decent level of challenge. The way this map places enemies and times reinforcements is excellent, and the recruitment of Klein and Thea is really well done, encouraging you to plan your movements and have efficient control of the map. When you do recruit Klein, you get a very solid unit with good stats for his join time and A rank bows, very similar to Inez in Revolta Casino, and Klein is pretty unique in FE6 for being a pre-promoted unit with very high growth rates compared to the traditional low growth rates that pre-promotes normally possess. 35 strength and 45 speed is very, very good for FE6, and on par with Walt's 40 strength and 40 speed. And the whole point of Walt is he's meant to be a growth unit, but why would you ever train Walt when you have his bases and weapon rank being atrocious, and you could just wait and use Klein, who is just as good or better in every department, and you don't have to invest any training into him. And Klein gets hard mode bonuses, which gives him an extra 1 to 4 points in every stat, making him a fantastic player phase combat unit. Thea definitely isn't as good. She still gets hard mode bonuses, so she'll be better than Shanna at the same level, but you've had 10 levels for Shanna to contribute and be trained, and Thea still suffers from the Pegasus curse of terrible constitution, meaning she gets slowed down by almost every lance in the game. But her recruitment is cool, and it's nice to have a Peg join with good combat stats on hard mode. Echidna, on the other hand, is a fantastic unit. if she survives the first turn. She enters the map with a steel axe that slows her down by 6 points of speed and reduces her avoidance by 12, and if you don't make it to the middle of the map in time and you get unlucky, then the axe fighters that spawn around her on turn 8 can kill her immediately. This isn't super likely to happen, but it is very heartbreaking if it does, especially in an Iron Man where you can't reset. But more often than not, she'll survive long enough for you to recruit her, and as soon as you get some more suitable weaponry onto her, she becomes one of your best combat units at this point in the game. Echidna has some of the best bases in the entire game with 13 attack, 18 speed and 8 defense, and our growths are pretty respectable as well with 75 HP, 30 strength and 30 speed, so she's a great combat unit throughout the entire mid game. Getting to all of these objectives in time can be tricky, but you start this map with the dancer Laram, who provides exactly the utility you need by dancing your units across the map at speed. Every aspect of this map, including the characters that join your party, it's all fantastic and very well designed. I struggle to think of another GBA map that has map design that is as good or as fun as this chapter, and I can't consider putting it any lower than the top 3. Number 2 is FE7 Light. The hero of the Western Isles is, in my opinion, the perfectly designed traditional Fire Emblem map. However, not every map in Fire Emblem is a traditional map, and I'm mainly talking about a game's final chapter. These normally function a bit differently to every other chapter in the game. They often have a 2-stage map with a big boss and then a really big final boss, and this is cool because you get a dope final boss that's normally really awesome, but in FE6 and FE8, as well as a lot of the other games in the series, the other enemies in the chapter are unnamed generics and don't provide a very unique experience. FE7's final chapter, Light, is my favourite final map in any of the Fire Emblem games I've played, which is about half of the games in the series, and I think it is a fantastic final map. Instead of generic unnamed enemies for you to fight, you get the morphs of loads of different bosses and characters who have died throughout the story that Nurgle has created using the essence that was harvested from them at the time of their death. In the story, this makes total sense. It doesn't feel like a gimmick or anything, at least to me, and it's super cool fighting these really powerful enemies that you actually know, and the fact that they wield the legendary weapons is even cooler, even if it doesn't make the most sense story-wise. For one character, this is the only time in the game you actually get to fight them, and that is the leader of the Black Fang, Brendan Reed, and killing units like Brendan and his sons Lloyd and Linus, and seeing them at peace as their essence is released from the unnatural constructs that Nurgle has created, is really satisfying. It's also really satisfying to see Nurgle finally defeated and his story completed. Throughout the campaign, we get glimpses of Nurgle's backstory, where his wife gets kidnapped at the end of the Scouring and Nurgle goes to try and find her, leaving his children Ninian and Nils instructions to go through the Dragon's Gate if he doesn't return in time. He eventually returns too late and cannot open the gates without a dragon, so he delves into dark magic to try and open the gate another way and reunite with his children. But the dark magic is corrupting and leaves him with the desire for the power to open the Dragon's Gate, but he loses his memories of his family and the reason why he wanted to open it in the first place. In his final dying moments after you defeat him, he has a moment of clarity where he questions why he was even trying to gain power before using the last of his energy to open the Dragon's Gate as his final act. I personally really like this end for Nurgle's character, even if quite a few people aren't a massive fan of Nurgle or the story of FE7 in general, which is unfortunate because Nurgle is a compelling, tragic villain, but his backstory and reasoning for his actions is all pretty hidden in the story, and you have to go digging around online to get a proper appreciation for his character. His final words even have a mistranslation in the English version of the game, where he's supposed to say his wife's name in his dying moments, but because the word they used for quintessence in Japanese is one letter different to his wife's name Aenir, it got messed up, so he randomly just says quintessence before he dies. It's frustrating. I still find his story really tragic in its entirety, and this is a really satisfying final chapter story-wise. You also get Athos, who is such a fun unit, he absolutely smacks. People criticise Athos for being too OP and not being well designed, and I do agree he should not have a dark magic rank. Giving him Luna should not be the best way of using him. Let him use his personal legendary weapon 4Blaze and leave it at that. It doesn't make sense for him to be able to use Luna, and it does kind of trivialise the enemies, but if you feel that way, you can just impose a rule to not use Luna, or to not use him for combat, or just not use him at all, whatever you want to do. I think that the Fire Dragon is a really impressive final boss. I love the animations for it, and it's a cool big boss to defeat even if it doesn't have that much story relevance. But the main reason I like this chapter so much more than any other final chapter is just having the actual named enemies to fight. That adds so much to the experience for me, and I think it's fairly unique. These are all obviously subjective opinions, and you can pretend this map is placed lower on the list if it upsets you, but for me personally, I absolutely love it, and it's my second favourite favourite map in GBA. And before the final map, I do have a couple of honourable mentions. I wanted to give credit to FE8 Two Faces of Evil for being a very unique map, different to any other map I can think of. This is the chapter where Demon King Leon leads you into a Gorgon's nest with eggs hatching all around you as the chapter goes on. The egg hatching mechanic is the most unique thing I can think of in the GBA games, as they aren't very gimmicky or creative in general, so I love that this map is very different. And it's also really fun for training up your units before the final few chapters, because killing an egg before it hatches awards a unit with a fixed 50 XP, which is massive. It's just a really different map that I think deserves some credit, as does the other honourable mention, which is Fort Rigwald. In this chapter, you get to kill Geb. That's it, that's the whole reason. Geb is possibly the grossest, creepiest enemy in all of Fire Emblem. If you can think of anyone worse than him, put it in the comments, and getting to kill him is just satisfying. And then finally, at my number 1 spot, we have FE7 Port of Badon. And right off the bat, this chapter is not better than every other map on this list, which is weird to say about my number 1 pick, but it's true. There's better maps on this list. If you aren't letting emotional attachments influence your decision-making process at all, then there's a couple of other maps on this list that I think would be very strong picks for number 1, such as Hero of the Western Isles. But this is my list, so screw you, I like it. Port of Badon is my favourite Fire Emblem map of all time. I bloody love this thing. A massive part of the reason why I love this map more than any other in Fire Emblem is what it means to me personally, and that is not going to translate to anyone else. When I think of Fire Emblem, I think of this map. I have countless memories of playing this chapter as a child and as a teenager, and I definitely spent more time on this map than any other over the years. I've probably spent more than 1 or maybe even 200 hours on this map alone. The map is very simple at its core. You have 2 options to pass the map. You can skirt around the top where there's only a couple of low-level enemies in your way and talk to Fargus, or you can go through the terrifying high-level enemies with scary weapons and give yourself a real challenge. Both options are valid. If you're looking for an easy clear, especially if you're playing an Iron Man, then you can do the first option, basically recruiting Canas and then getting out of there before you lose a unit. Or if you want to test your units and get them a buttload of XP from the high-level enemies in the centre, then you can test your steel against them. I always found this second option so enjoyable, and I'd replay this chapter just for fun quite often. The killer and silver weapons on the enemies pose a real danger to your units, even beasts like Marcus, and even with careful play you still might lose a unit. But the XP reward is worth the trouble, and if it doesn't sound fun, then you have the option to just avoid them. The main reason I spent so much time on this map is it's the first time in FE7 where you have access to the arena, and boy did I sink time into this thing. I would play this map on cartridge and try to get all of my units to level 20, and when I got a unit killed in the arena, I'd more often than not restart the chapter from scratch and try again. And then in later years, when I was playing on an emulator, I would save state before a level up, and I'd try and get my units the best possible level ups so that they'd cap multiple steps, and I could look at those green glowy numbers and feel a sense of accomplishment. I got so much satisfaction out of this map, and it cemented its place in my heart for all time. Once again, if you want to turn this list into a more objective one, just bump Light down a couple of spots and then bump Port of Badon down a few spots as well, leaving Hero of the Western Isles as the number 1 place. But at the end of the day, it's impossible to separate our personal tastes from our judgment, and that's okay. So I'm going to ask you guys to hop down into the comments at this point and let me know what you thought of the list, what you agreed with, what you disagreed with, and most importantly, tell me your favourite GBA map and why it's your favourite. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say. This video was kind of a 2,000 subscriber special, so I do want to say another thank you for all the support. We only did the 1,000 sub special like a month ago, so it's really cool to see this community growing so quickly. I'm hoping to release the Discord for this channel soon, so hopefully we can really get the community vibes going in the near future, so keep your eyes peeled for new updates. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.